Don't say a word. Just leave when your daughter goes upstairs. My ex-wife whispered across the table, her eyes barely meeting mine. The roast chicken sat untouched between us, the clink of silverware the only sound keeping time with my thudding heart. It had been 5 years since I last saw Chloe. She had invited me over, out of nowhere, no reason given. I thought maybe this was it. A second chance. But the tension in the room made it hard to breathe. She barely spoke. Her husband was polite. Our granddaughter laughed like she had no idea I was a stranger. But then, a message popped up on my phone while I was in the bathroom. Leave. Now. She knows. Knows what? I used to believe the worst thing I'd done was leave. But what if the worst was something I never knew I did? Or worse, something I was made to forget. I left that night without saying goodbye. I stood in the driveway for 10 minutes, just staring at the front door, hoping it would open. It never did. And yet, there were letters, dozens of them. I had sent Chloe over the years. Birthday cards, apologies, handwritten confessions she never replied to. But when I saw that small box in her closet weeks later, buried under winter coats, I realized something chilling. She had kept every single one, unopened. Every word I ever wrote sat in that box like corpses in a coffin. She hadn't ignored me. She had watched me suffer. I hadn't seen Chloe in 5 years, maybe more. The last time, it was a brief encounter outside a bookstore, and even then, she pretended not to see me. So when her name lit up on my phone, inviting me for dinner, my hands trembled. I must have reread the message a dozen times before I replied with a simple, "I'd love to." I arrived 10 minutes early and waited in the car. The house looked different, yet familiar. 2 stories, white siding, a wind chime at the porch that hadn't changed since she was 16. I sat there rehearsing what to say. Should I start with, "I'm sorry"? Should I pretend like time hadn't happened? The door opened. Chloe's husband, Mark, waved me in with a warmth that caught me off guard. "Thomas, we're glad you could make it," he said, his handshake firm, unburdened. Then came my granddaughter, Emily, running toward me with crayons in hand. "Grandpa, can you help me draw a horse later?" I smiled, unsure if she truly remembered me or if someone had coached her. Then Chloe appeared. She was older, harder around the eyes, dressed in a gray sweater that matched the tone of her voice when she said, "Hi, Dad." No hug, no smile, just protocol. She turned back into the kitchen without waiting for a response. The dinner table was set perfectly, silverware aligned, candles lit. There were 3 dishes: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans. Emily talked about her school project. Mark chimed in with dad jokes. And Chloe, she just kept chewing. Not once did she look at me, not even when I complimented her cooking. Halfway through the meal, she excused herself upstairs to check on something. That's when my ex-wife leaned in. Her eyes locked on the hallway. Not me. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible. "Don't say a word. Just leave when your daughter goes upstairs." I blinked. "What?" She didn't repeat herself. She leaned back like nothing had happened and took a sip of water. My pulse spiked. I looked around the table. No one else noticed anything. Emily laughed at something Mark said. But for me, the air thickened. I stayed until dessert, mostly in silence. Chloe came back down, but barely acknowledged my presence. Her smiles were reserved for Mark and Emily. I asked if she needed help cleaning up. She shook her head. "You can go now if you want." I left, quietly. just like I had so many years ago. Back at the motel, the air felt stale. I turned on the bedside lamp and stared at the wallpaper, cheap and peeling. The silence was louder here. I poured a glass of tap water, sat down, and opened the old leather folder I'd brought. Inside were copies of letters I had written over the years. Dozens of them. Every birthday, every Christmas. The letter from the hospital when I had surgery, even the one I wrote after seeing her at the bookstore. They were never answered. For years, I believed she had rejected me, had no interest in hearing what I had to say. But that night, something shifted. The way she looked at me. So controlled. Not angry, just indifferent. It didn't feel like absence. It felt like punishment. I picked up my phone to scroll through old messages, not expecting anything new, but there it was. A new text. No name. She knows. Don't come back. My breath caught. I stared at it for minutes, rereading every word. Who sent it? My ex-wife? Mark? Chloe? Or someone else entirely? I looked at the stack of letters again. They represented years of trying to be better, to be present. I hadn't been the father she needed, and I'd never pretended otherwise. But was that enough to earn this? This calculated clinical coldness? I didn't sleep much that night. The motel room buzzed with old light and new questions. I kept hearing that whisper again and again. Just leave when your daughter goes upstairs. Leave what or who? I showed up the next weekend with a small gift for Emily. A paint-by-numbers unicorn set I saw at the drugstore. Chloe opened the door with the same neutral face, like she'd been expecting a delivery. Not her father. She let me in without a word, and I stepped carefully into their immaculate living room, holding the toy like a peace offering. Emily squealed when she saw it. "Thank you, Grandpa," she beamed, hugging my leg. Chloe gave a tight smile. That was thoughtful. Mark was friendly again, but distant in a way that felt learned. Chloe barely looked at me. She sat on the couch, scrolling on her phone while I knelt beside Emily at the coffee table. For a moment, I forgot the tension and just colored with my granddaughter. I didn't want to push. I just wanted to be there. When I tried to make small talk with Chloe, asking about her work, about her garden she used to love, she brushed it off politely. "Busy?" she said. Or, "Not much time for hobbies anymore." Always followed by a shift of focus. Dishes to do, emails to check, some excuse to move away. It wasn't hostility. That would have at least been honest. It was the deliberate act of keeping me just far enough outside. I was allowed in the house, but never past the hallway of her heart. I came by twice more in the following weeks. Each time, I brought something small. Cookies I remembered she liked, a book I thought she'd enjoy, a framed photo of her as a baby with me at the beach. They remained unopened, unacknowledged, stacked quietly in the corner of the entryway. One afternoon, Emily tugged on my sleeve while we were playing. "Mommy keeps all her special stuff in a secret box," she whispered, giggling like she'd revealed a treasure map. "It's in her closet. She says it's for things she doesn't want to feel yet." The words hit me like ice water. Things she doesn't want to feel yet. I smiled at Emily and nodded, but my stomach turned. Could it be? Could that be where the letters were? The cards? The photos I sent through the years? A place not forgotten, just shelved? Later that day, when Chloe stepped out to take a call, I asked Mark gently, "Do you know if she ever got my letters, back when she was growing up?" He hesitated, eyes darting toward the stairs. You'd have to ask her. But I already knew the answer. It was the following Saturday when I stopped by unannounced, something I promised myself I wouldn't do. I had a folder in my bag, copies of every letter I'd written. I wasn't going to leave them. I was going to hand them to her and say, "These are yours." They always were. But when I reached the front porch, I heard voices. Not angry, just hushed. Private. I paused. Chloe's voice, low and clipped. "No, Em, you don't hug him first, let him ask. You always wait." My breath hitched. Emily sounded confused. "But he's nice. He brings me fun stuff." There was silence. Then Chloe said, "He left. He chose to. You don't owe him anything." I stepped back, heart pounding. A week later, I confronted my ex-wife over coffee. I asked her, outright, if she'd hidden the letters, if she'd poisoned Chloe against me. She looked tired, older than I remembered. "I didn't hide them," she said. She did. After she turned 12, she started checking the mailbox first. I thought she was throwing them away, but then I found them, all neatly stacked, hidden in a drawer. I wanted to give them to her, but she wouldn't let me. I stared at her. You let her grow up believing I didn't care. I tried, Thomas. I really did. But she made up her mind. She didn't want a maybe father. She wanted certainty, and silence was simpler. My hands trembled around the coffee mug. My chest ached, not from anger, but from something worse. Recognition. I had left. I had let the silence happen. I just never imagined she'd use it to build a fortress. I stood to leave. My ex touched my arm. "I once thought you'd come back and fix everything." But Chloe decided she'd rather feel nothing than be disappointed again. I nodded once, then walked away. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from regret. I was familiar with regret. No, what kept me awake was something else. The image of a little girl building a box inside her closet, stuffing it full of unopened letters, locking away every unanswered question, and teaching her daughter to do the same. I drove 3 hours to the small town where Chloe spent most of her childhood, a place I had once promised to stay, but never did. It was colder than I remembered, or maybe I was just older. Everything looked smaller. Houses, streets, even regrets, until I parked in front of the old post office. The clerk didn't recognize me, but after I showed him some ID and explained my reason, he pointed to a corner mailbox, dusty and faded. "We used to deliver to that route," he said. "But mail stopped going to that house years ago. Family requested forwarding service be canceled." That didn't make sense. I had mailed letters to that address for years. I thanked him, left, and walked the few blocks to the library. The building hadn't changed. Still smelled of musty carpet and paperback ink. I asked the librarian if I could check microfiche archives, town records, anything showing mail suspensions or complaints. Nothing. Then I asked a question I never thought I would. Did a young girl ever check this mailbox regularly? Maybe around 2009 to 2011? The librarian thought, then nodded slowly. Yes. Chloe, right? Always early. Very polite. Brought her bike. Every Tuesday and Friday. A chill crawled down my spine. That night, I drove back with the windows down, needing air but not finding enough of it. My mind replayed everything. The unanswered birthdays, the photos I sent, the long letters about missing her, hoping she was okay. She hadn't missed them. She had taken them. All of them. Not out of spite. Not even out of hatred. But out of something far colder. Control. She had wanted to decide when, or if my words were ever heard. A protest without sound. a punishment without confrontation, a child's silent rebellion that grew sharper with age. By the time she was 15, Chloe had already mastered how to keep me close enough to feel guilty, but far enough to never let me explain. I stared at the motel ceiling that night, counting the grooves in the plaster like tally marks. I wondered how many Tuesdays and Fridays she had ridden out to intercept my words before they ever touched her world. She hadn't just kept me out of her life. She had curated the version of me she wanted to remember and buried the rest in a box. The next weekend, she invited me to a barbecue at their place. It felt too sudden, but I went. I told myself maybe she was softening. Maybe the silence was finally breaking. The backyard was filled with people, neighbors, co-workers, old college friends. Chloe greeted me with a half smile, gestured toward the drink table. Mark clapped me on the back and handed me a beer. Emily ran over with painted nails, showing off like I was any other grandparent. For a moment, I felt like I belonged. Then Chloe picked up a glass, tapped a spoon against it, and smiled at the group. "Can I have everyone's attention for a second?" Laughter died down. Conversations hushed. "I just want to thank you all for coming. It's been a big year for our family, and we've got someone special here today." She glanced at me. "My dad." Polite applause. Smiles. I nodded awkwardly. She continued, "For those who don't know, my father wasn't always around when I was growing up. Actually, he missed most birthdays, holidays, school plays. He had a lot going on, I guess." Laughter, but the wrong kind. Uneasy. "But hey," she added, raising her glass, "better late than never, right?" More laughter. I didn't laugh. The words didn't stab. They sunk. Slowly. Like weights tied to old memories. People went back to chatting, but something in me snapped. I walked over to her, quiet but direct. "That was unnecessary," I said. She didn't look surprised. It was true. It was cruel. She took a sip of her wine. So was being 12 and waiting by the phone every Sunday. I couldn't respond. I turned, walked through the yard, and left without saying goodbye. Again, I sat in my car outside for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel like it might keep me from unraveling. Through the window, I could see her. Chloe had returned to her guests, smiling, hosting, passing plates. But then, just for a second, when she thought no one was looking, she stepped behind the curtain of the kitchen window and wiped her eyes. It wasn't victory. It wasn't satisfaction. It was mourning. Not for me. For the girl who never got the version of me she needed. And for the man she'd taught herself to forget. I stopped waiting. For years, I had let Chloe dictate the terms of our relationship. When I could speak, when I could see her, how much of myself I was allowed to give. And I told myself it was what I deserved, some twisted penance. But after that barbecue, after watching her weaponize the crowd and then quietly fall apart behind the glass, something in me shifted. I wasn't angry. Not exactly. But I was done being small. Back at the motel, I laid everything out. Phone recordings, screenshots, my journal entries, emails she never answered, and most importantly, copies of every letter I'd written. I made a packet, numbered every page, wrote a timeline. I wasn't going to accuse her. I was going to show her. I recorded a short voice memo and attached it to the front. Nothing dramatic, just the truth. I know I wasn't there, Chloe. I know I failed. But you're not the only one who got hurt. You built silence like a fortress. I tried to knock on the door, year after year. These are the knocks. Every single one. I'm not asking to be forgiven. I'm asking not to be erased. At the bottom of the stack, I added a note in handwriting she hadn't seen in decades. I'm not perfect, but I'm not silent anymore. I left it at her doorstep just after sunrise. No knock, no waiting, just the box. By noon, she called. Her name lit up my screen, and for the first time in years, I didn't hesitate to answer. Tomorrow, she said. Afternoon. Just us. Come alone. She hung up before I could reply. I arrived early. Her home was quiet, blinds drawn, the world muffled. She led me into the living room. No greetings, no tension, just an air of exhaustion, like we'd both run too far to turn back. We sat, no words. Then she stood, crossed the room, and opened a cabinet I hadn't seen before. From inside, she pulled out a small wooden box, weathered, with a tiny brass lock left unlatched. She placed it between us. Open it, she said. I lifted the lid. Inside were every letter I had written. Not copies. Originals. Still sealed, some yellowing at the edges, but all there. Dozens of them, wrapped in elastic bands, grouped by year. I looked up, stunned. I read them, she said. Every single one. Just not when you sent them. Why keep them sealed? She looked at her hands. Because I wasn't ready to know if you loved me. I told myself if I didn't open them, I could stay angry. Anger was easier. But you opened them eventually. She nodded. Last year, after Emily asked me why she didn't know her grandpa, I read them all in one night. I felt something crack open in my chest. Why didn't you tell me? She took a breath. Because I needed you to know what it felt like. To be left with nothing but waiting. To wonder if someone even thought about you. I wanted you to sit in that same silence I sat in for years. I blinked back something thick behind my eyes. That's what this was? A lesson? No, she said softly. A reaction. We sat like that, quiet, raw, surrounded by the proof of both our pain. She wasn't cruel. I wasn't blameless. We were just two wounded people who had learned to survive in opposite ways. I shut out guilt, and she nurtured silence like a second language. She reached into the box, pulled out one envelope, and handed it to me. Read it, she said. It was dated the year she turned 16. My words were desperate, hopeful. I had written about wanting to see her again, how much she'd grown in the photos her mother had shared. I begged her to call, just once. When I finished, I looked at her. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't wipe them. I never stopped hoping, I said. She looked down. I never stopped hurting. We didn't hug. We didn't fall into each other's arms. This wasn't a movie. It was a meeting point between past and present, guilt and grief, father and daughter. She stood. I'm not promising anything, she said. I'm not asking for everything, I replied. She nodded, then walked me to the door. And for the first time, she said, Drive safe, Dad. We met again a week later. Not at her house, but at a quiet diner near the edge of town. The kind of place with cracked leather booths and servers who know your name. It was Chloe's choice, neutral ground. We sat across from each other with coffee between us, the menu untouched. For once, there was no pretense, no forced smiles, no Emily or Mark or anyone to fill the silence. Just us. She spoke first. You said in your letters that you used to sit in airports for hours, just thinking about what to write. I nodded. It was the only place I felt close to you. Everyone was going somewhere. I wasn't. She looked down, then back up. You ever wonder why I never wrote back? I did, every day. But eventually, I convinced myself that you were better off not hearing from me. I was ashamed. Ashamed I left, and worse, that I didn't fight harder to come back. Her eyes didn't soften, but they stopped resisting. You always had a way of disappearing, she said, even when you were in the room. I know, I said. I used to think showing up was enough. That mailing a letter, sending a birthday card, it meant something. But now I realize it didn't matter if you knew I cared. What mattered was that you never got to feel it. She took a sip of her coffee. You know what I remember most about being a kid? Birthdays. Not the parties. Those were small. It was always just Mom and me. But I remember thinking, every year, maybe this is the one. Maybe this is the birthday he shows up. I didn't interrupt. She continued, her voice steadier than I expected. And when you didn't, I'd pretend you were just late. I'd wait by the window until it got dark. And then I'd go to sleep thinking maybe there'd be a letter in the mailbox the next day. There was a sharp ache in my chest, like something folded in me had been snapped straight. I sent them, I whispered. I know. I found them all. But back then, I thought you'd forgotten. And once you believe you've been forgotten, it's hard to believe anything else. I leaned forward, voice low. Chloe, if I could go back, if I could rewrite just one moment, I would. She looked at me, something shifting behind her eyes. If you could go back, she asked quietly, to one day in my life, which day would you choose? I hesitated. Your first recital, I said. The one I missed because my flight got canceled. You were 9. You played piano in a pink dress. I had the program your mom sent. I stared at that paper for hours, imagining it. She nodded, lips tight. What about you? I asked. She blinked slowly. If you could go back to one day in my life. Her voice cracked. The day I graduated high school. A pause. You promised you'd come. Said you had it written in ink on your calendar. I did. You didn't show. I swallowed hard. Chloe, I was there. She looked at me, stunned. What? I flew in the night before. I stood outside the field. Your mother saw me. She came out with security. Said if I came near, she'd call the police. Said it would ruin your day. Her hands trembled. You were there? I watched from the fence. I saw you cross the stage. You looked so proud. Her voice fell to a whisper. I thought you just didn't care. I shook my head. I cared too much to cause a scene. I thought staying away was the least I could do. That maybe you'd enjoy your day if you didn't see me. I was wrong. She looked away, wiping her face, then back at me, raw and stripped down. You should have fought harder. I know, I said, but I'm here now. She didn't reply, just sat there, blinking away the flood in her eyes, as if trying to hold on to what little was left of her armor. I'm not asking for a second chance, I added. I just don't want to be the ghost anymore. We sat in silence. But this time, it didn't hurt. It healed. The envelope came in the mail 2 weeks later. No text, no phone call. Just my name and Chloe's handwriting on the front, and a soft pink card inside. Emily's turning 8. We're having a small party at the park. You're welcome to come. There were no conditions, no apologies, no expectations. Just that one word, welcome. It didn't feel like forgiveness. Not exactly. But it was something better than silence. An invitation, cautious and careful, written with the kind of trembling trust that only comes after years of holding your breath. I stood in the card aisle for 20 minutes trying to choose a birthday gift. Something light enough to bring but meaningful enough to remember. I settled on a sketchbook and a set of watercolor pencils. Emily had once told me she wanted to paint something real. I didn't know if I could give her that, but I could give her the tools. The park was already filled with balloons when I arrived. Chloe was helping set up the tables, her hair pulled back, sunglasses hiding her eyes. Mark gave me a nod and handed me a soda. Emily ran over with frosting on her nose and threw her arms around my waist like I'd never missed a moment. "Grandpa, you came." I wouldn't miss it for the world. We sat on picnic benches and ate cake. I helped hang streamers and poured apple juice into paper cups. Chloe moved through the party like someone practicing peace, checking on everyone, even pausing once to ask if I needed anything. I told her I was fine, and I meant it. There was no long conversation between us that day. No revisiting the pain, no rehashing the past. Just a quiet nod when I handed Emily her gift, and a small, almost invisible smile when our eyes met as she opened it. That was enough. The days that followed unfolded slowly, like old pages turning. No dramatic declarations, no sudden closeness. But once a week, I'd get a photo of Emily painting, or Chloe would send me a link to a book she thought I might like. There were still silences, but not the kind that hurt. These were pauses filled with possibility, not punishment. One Sunday, I stopped by unannounced with bagels. Chloe met me at the door, looked at the bag, then stepped aside to let me in. We ate at the counter while Emily read to us from a chapter book, her voice stumbling, but proud. Chloe didn't say much, but she didn't need to. Her presence was softer now, like she was finally letting herself sit beside the memory of me instead of running from it. I never asked her to say sorry. I never said it again either. It was as if we'd said it all already, in every unopened letter, every moment missed, every shared glance now trying to fill the space. And maybe that's what rebuilding looks like. Not sweeping gestures or grand apologies. Just two people choosing, day after day, not to walk away again. That night, I returned to the motel room that had become my halfway home and opened the worn leather journal I'd started years ago. The pages were filled with ink-stained hopes, regretful memories, lists of things I wanted to say but couldn't. At the bottom of a fresh page, I wrote, "She doesn't need to call me Dad. I just want to be allowed to stand beside her." It was the simplest truth I had. I closed the journal and sat on the edge of the bed, watching the curtains sway in the breeze. Outside, the moon was full, quiet and patient, just like I had learned to be. My phone buzzed. A text. From Emily. No emojis. Just, "Can I call you?" I replied yes, fingers shaking. Seconds later, her voice lit up the room. "Grandpa." "Hey, sweetheart. Can you tell me a story?" she asked. "A real one. From when my mom was little. Like a good memory?" I felt my throat tighten. Not because I didn't have one, but because I finally had someone who wanted to hear it. So I told her about the time Chloe tried to bake cookies for her third-grade bake sale and used salt instead of sugar. How she cried when she tasted them, and how we stayed up that night remaking the whole batch together while she wore my old baseball cap backward and sang along to the radio. Emily laughed. "That sounds like her." "She's always been brave," I said, even when she didn't feel like it. There was a pause on the line. Then quietly, "I'm glad you're here now." "Me too, kid," I wanted to say. "Me too." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet a little longer, No fireworks, no final scene, just a man in a borrowed room, holding on to something real for the first time in a very long time.